This is a lovely $30 million mansion in Malibu in Southern California. This is a bejeweled glove that Michael Jackson wore on the tour to support his album Bad. It's a crystal-encrusted Michael Jackson glove. Same guy who owned the jagillion-dollar mansion and Michael Jackson's bejeweled glove also owns all of these cars, which are very nice cars. And it's not just Porsches and Ferraris. He also owns some of the rarest cars in the world, including some Swedish thing called a Koenigsegg. I think that's how you say it. Koenigsegg. Koenigsegg. He had one that was one of only 7 ever produced. It cost something like $3 million for a car. Same guy owned all this junk. The mansion, the rare cars, Michael Jackson's bejeweled glove. He also apparently owned 6 life-sized Michael Jackson statues. Not all that big, actually. Michael Jackson wasn't all that. Anyway, all the same guy. And this is the part where I tell you the good news, that the guy who owns all of this stuff is not the latest announced nominee for the Trump cabinet. No, it is the vice president of a country called Equatorial Guinea. His dad is the president. He's the longest serving president of any country on earth. He's been in power for 36 or something years. Last year, he appointed his son to be vice president, and so the son got famous for something other than having Michael Jackson's bejeweled glove. Equatorial Guinea is one of the poorest nations on earth. 3/4 of the population lives below the poverty line. Most of the country lives on less than $2 a day. But Equatorial Guinea has oil, a lot of it. And starting in the mid-90s, they started getting huge royalty checks from oil companies who were pumping oil out of that country. And because of that oil money, on paper, Equatorial Guinea is doing great. On paper, they've got the highest GDP per capita in Africa. But none of that money gets to the people. Over 3/4 of its population is below the poverty line. The government spends less on education and health than even the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. But for the ruling family, things have never been better. This past April, the country held an election, and that longest-serving president in the world, he won with 94% of the vote. It's actually a little less than what he won by in 2009 when he got 97% of the vote. The president's family runs everything. His eldest son, the guy that loves the cars and the Michael Jackson junk, he's the vice president. The president's other son runs the oil ministry. The first lady's brother is the head of the state-owned oil company GE Petrol. And as that family has made itself fabulously wealthy off the resources of that country, while the people of that country starve, it's now newly relevant here in our politics that the company that handed over all the money, the company that pumped all that money into Equatorial Guinea, the biggest oil company in the country, the company that brought the first oil field there into production in 1995, that company is, say it with me now, Exxon. Still does business there. Their own website, they brag about being the largest oil producer in that country. They are partnered with the state-run oil company run by the First Lady's brother. And if you want to know how the oil money for that country ended up not in that country, but instead just in the pockets of the ruling family, turns out it's really simple. Turns out when Exxon would pay Equatorial Guinea for allowing them to operate there and pump oil there, they would dump millions and millions and millions of dollars into the ruling family's personal Riggs bank account in Washington, D.C. Right through 2004, they were doing that when U.S. authorities discovered that bank account, and that became the subject of a U.S. Senate investigation. And that is now newly relevant because the guy who is maybe going to be our next Secretary of State was the CEO of Exxon when they were funneling money into the president of Equatorial Guinea's private account. And Exxon never really felt pain for that before. But boy, are they now. Hold that thought.
I wanted to turn to Equatorial Guinea. Senator brought this up earlier today about the corruption of the leadership of that particular country. The president for life, President Obiang, has become exceedingly rich, and part of the way that he's become exceedingly rich is the payments that Exxon has made have gone to his family's accounts rather than going to the national treasury. What are your thoughts on why Exxon participated in that, which continued in time that you were in the leadership of the company?
Senator, I'm familiar with the circumstance you're talking about. That was the subject of an investigation by the Judiciary Committee. There were no findings that Exxon had committed any wrong or broken any laws at the end of that investigation. In terms of the payments that ExxonMobil would make in any arrangement, a contract in any country, would be no different than they are made with domestic producers here in the U.S. that are operating on federal lands. There's royalty and there's taxes paid to the Treasury. What the government does with those monies once the company pays those is up to the government. Obviously, the U.S. government distributes those funds responsibly. Some countries, I understand, do not. In ExxonMobil's engagement in countries like this, though, I do think that on the whole there are positive benefits to the people of the country in terms of job creation that occurs because of the activity, employment that occurs because of the activity, and I'm not in any way suggesting that that mitigates the corruption in the country, but that it is not without benefit and is not without having American values on the ground in those countries as well. And this is true not just of the extractive industries portion or sector, but it's true of any American business that may be engaging in business activities in countries which have very poor governance structures at the top.
You mentioned that royalties and taxes should go to the government, but in this case, Exxon made the payments to a private account controlled by the President. Do you see anything wrong with that?
I'd have to review for my memory the circumstance you're talking about. My recollection is that that account was designated as the government's account, and I think when it was discovered that the account either may or may not have been a valid account, it was closed.
There are also a number of contracts that Exxon did with companies controlled by the family members of the President. This included building leases and land leases and a number of series of other contracts, the net effect of which was transferring a lot of for life, someone who has no interest in democratic principles. The State Department has reported on this for many, many years, each year doing this report on Equatorial Guinea. 2003 states there's little evidence the government used the country's oil wealth for the public good. The oil wealth is concentrated in the hands of the top government officials, while the majority of the population remained poor. The State Department actually cut their foreign economic assistance to the country because of the massive corruption and control by this family. And it ties in earlier. One of my colleagues mentioned a situation where I believe a whole series of very expensive sports cars were being loaded onto a plane to be flown into Equatorial Guinea. But those weren't being paid for by U.S. foreign assistance. Those were being paid for by diverted oil royalties. And I think it does raise not just a legal question, and you've noted that no legal violation was found, but it certainly raises a moral question about how one engages a country and increases the power of leaders who are doing nothing to elevate the quality of life of their citizens. Do you share any of that perspective?
Senator, again, my recollection is that in all the examples that you mentioned, they were investigated. There were no violations of law. During my time at ExxonMobil, ExxonMobil took at that time, and I expect still do, very seriously the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and it has in place processes to ensure that the corporation and all of its employees remained in full compliance. Any suspected violations were always fully investigated, and if anything was found, the process would have dictated a full investigation, a resolution, and if required, a self-reporting process. So I think the corporation had very strong procedures in place to ensure compliance, and I think the examples you're giving, while I understand the concern you're expressing, indicated that the process to ensure there was no violation of Foreign Corrupt Practices Acts did perform and did withstand that investigation.
Joining us now is Oregon Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who pinned Rex Tillerson on that yesterday, and who today announced his opposition to the Secretary of State nomination of Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson. Senator, it's nice to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Are you excited to be able to talk with somebody else about Equatorial Guinea and their corruption and Exxon's role in it?
Well, indeed, absolutely. I think it's a story that the American people need to know.
The thing that struck me about that exchange, and I watched that while it happened, was that his answer to you basically was, yeah, we didn't break any laws.
The answer was, we haven't been successfully prosecuted for it, so it must be okay. And when I pointed out that the family's phenomenally powerful and rich, president for life, really dictator is the right word, while the people are absolutely oppressed, impoverished, and that all this oil wealth is being channeled into just this one family, and that they're cooperating with that, they're helping make it happen, that this is a huge problem. And he just said it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
We were never found to be breaking any laws.
Yeah. No, that's right.
That was the line of questioning, the line of discussion on Equatorial Guinea. That sort of line of questioning has come up with him in around a number of other countries where Exxon has acted in ways that are not I would say not consistent with American values and American interests. But Exxon, it was legal. And that's what they're doing, including in Kurdistan, when American soldiers were dying to try to create a single Iraqi government. Exxon was undermining it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is it not a bipartisan concern, this line of questioning?
Well, I think it is. You had Marco Rubio raising the issue of Saudi Arabia. I raised the issue of Saudi Arabia using cluster munitions. So you have the bipartisan, both of us concerned about it. Marco Rubio raised the concern about President Duterte of the Philippines having extrajudicial killings of more than 4,000 to 6,000 young men on the streets. And his answer in that case was simply, I need a little more information. And when I asked about cluster munitions, well, I don't really have thoughts on that. And he had started when he first came and talked to me in office in saying, my goal is to have moral clarity in U.S. policy. But all I heard during the testimony he gave was a complete lack of moral clarity. On issues, he should have been able to say, no, this is not right in the world, and America is going to try to take this on. For example, when it was raised about Russia and Putin authorizing the bombing of civilians that have killed hundreds of thousands and more than 4 to 5 million have fled the country, it was like he didn't have an opinion on it. It was deeply disturbing testimony.
Within the committee, and among these deliberations, do Democrats only talk to Democrats? Do you talk with your Republican colleagues on this? Do you have any sense about the depth of Republican concern? Obviously, even if all Democrats vote against him, he'll still be confirmed unless a Republican crosses over.
Well, and certainly this is the first stage in committee, and more could happen on the floor. There isn't a lot of conversation because we had 10 hours of hearing. We're sitting on opposite sides of the room, and then we're rushing onto the floor to start the health care debate, which took us till 2 in the morning. And so it was a crazy day. But I would hope that my Republican colleagues are hearing some things that should really bother them.
Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, it's really nice to have you here in person, sir. Thank you for being here, and come back soon.
Okay, great.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.